All right, grab your Bibles. Go ahead and turn to Genesis 26. Genesis 26. There's notes there in the bulletin for you to look at if you so choose, and some questions for after this morning. All right, Genesis 26. Now, when I first read this, probably 2 weeks ago, many thoughts came to mind. And as we look at Genesis 26, it's going to sound somewhat familiar because Isaac's life was very similar to his dad's, to Abraham's life. And it got me thinking about the differences between replays, as I was up late last night watching the Notre Dame game, and it was a really good game. But the instant replays, and what's the difference between an instant replay and a rerun? You see, we watch reruns just to see the same thing over and over again, but we watch the replay to kind of get more details about what actually happened. And it's cool how you can see all the angles and different moves and all those things. And it reminded me when I was a kid and I watched the Colts. This was pre-Peyton Manning days, but you remember the championship game, and Jim Harbaugh is the quarterback, and he throws the long one, and it looks like they're going to win, but then they were playing Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh had a receiver named Cordell Stewart. He stepped out of bounds, came back in, caught the touchdown, and that gave them the win, which, as you know, is not allowed in football. So after that, they instituted the instant replay. That was the game that kind of triggered instant replay in the NFL. But as I thought about all that as I read this chapter this week, and I think you'll be able to relate, because we're going to see in the life of Isaac, it's very similar to his father's. He's going to have ups, he's going to have downs, but my goal this morning is that we will learn some lessons about renewal, about regrets, about relationships, and about redemption. So let's dive in. Genesis 26, we're going to look at verses 1 through 6 first. Now, I must say as a caveat, before we start reading, this chapter does not line up chronologically in Genesis. It's as if Moses, who wrote this, took a little snapshot of Isaac's life and threw it in here, because we're getting ready to transition more to Jacob and Esau and their plan in God's redemption story. So know that these events are not happening chronologically, but we're going to get a quick glimpse here. So look at verses 1 through 6. We learn about renewal from the life of Isaac. Now, verse 1, now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar and to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my law. So Isaac settled in Gerar. Now, again, sounds very similar to Abraham's story, but we come into contact here. There's another famine. Now, this is not uncommon in this part of the world. If you think about the Middle East, there's famines, many times a lack of water, and people move around. We see Isaac. He's moving around just like his father did, and he wants some water for his people, for his livestock. You think about it's not just him and his family here. There's multitudes of people here that he has to provide for. So he goes to Gerar. Now, Titus is going to throw up a picture of what this place looks like today. It's really not much to stare at, but this is where he goes, and he meets this king, Abimelech. Now, Abimelech is not the same one we read about with Abraham. It's two different people, and we can explain this because it's as if we called multiple people are called president, but they have their individual names. It's as if we're calling this person President Abimelech, right? So it's just a title more than it's just a name that is given. So this person, he goes to Abimelech, and he's the king over the Philistines. Now, as you read on in Genesis and throughout the Scriptures, we learn that the Philistines were not the most kind of people. You think about Goliath, David and Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine. These people would be at war with Israel for years to come. However, we find an interesting story here with Isaac, because as Isaac is wandering around, he settles here, and God reestablishes his promise, his covenant promise to Isaac. What's he say? He says, I will give you land, I will give you children, and I will bless you. The same things he told Abraham. We're going to see that God is going to continue this covenant promise through Isaac and then through Jacob. And Isaac listened to God. He obeyed God. And at times, I think, as I began to read this, we all need to be reminded of God's promises in our life. One of those we saw last Sunday night. Samantha gave a testimony to our teens about what all God had taught her in this process of her battling the cancer. And it's actually online if you want to go look at it. We recorded it for her, and she gave permission for everybody to watch it and whatever. But it was a reminder that we got to see before our eyes God's testimony and His faithfulness in her life. It was amazing. One of the verses she read was this, Romans 8:28 and 29. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, in order that He might be the firstborn among many brothers. See, all these events that are happening in Isaac's life, and for us, all these events that happen in our lives, we find here are according to God's plan. They're for our good. So, therefore, we can trust God. We can trust Him. That what He brings us into our lives, He will see us through those events. And He's going to use those things to sanctify us. It's because God is faithful. God is trustworthy. God keeps His promises to His children. Moving on. Let's look at verse 7 through 11. Learning about regrets from Isaac. Starting in verse 7, when the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. Sounds familiar, right? For he feared to say, my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she's your wife. How then could you say she's my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought, lest I die because of her. So Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Now this sounds eerily familiar to Abraham and Sarah, right? Sounds eerily familiar because this happened with Abraham and Sarah. Abraham did this same thing, and one could easily think that probably Isaac learned this from his father Abraham. He learned this deceitful tactic that they used during those days and in that culture because, again, the Philistines were not to be messed with. This was a powerful, powerful people and would kill for much less than this. The fact that they did not is evidence that God's grace and mercy was shown to Isaac and Rebekah during this event. Now, there's many lines of paths we could take here. Unfortunately, Isaac did not defend his wife. He should have stood up for her, and we could go down that path today and talk about the need for that. However, I think there's something bigger here that's happening, because I like to think of it like this. There's power in influence. The kids watch shows. If Titus watches a superhero show, the next several days, that's who he is. Or Abby now, too. They're swinging webs all across the house, and they're swinging and all those things. The power of influence is real. Those who we surround ourselves with is often who we imitate the most. This is a real concept, and we see this right before our eyes, that there was power in Abraham's influence to his son Isaac. He used some of the same deceitful tactics. So for us, as we look at this, we need to make sure that our actions back up the faith that we say we believe. Because if they do not, what are we teaching others? What can they learn? The influence that we have on others is a real reality. Jesus said we are to live as lights in the world. So let your light shine. Third, look at verses 12 through 22. Verses 12 through 22, it says this, and we learn about relationships from Isaac. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. Now, look at what's happening here. He just messed up, much like his father, but God is still showing grace to him. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with the earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled. And Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they had contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also, and its name was Sitnah. It can also be translated Satan. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." So interesting story, right? An interesting encounter, much like his father had the same similar encounters, but we see even though Isaac messed up, God still blesses him. He has kept his covenant with Isaac. He promised that he would bless this man, and he is doing it. Much like Abraham had no reason to gain in wealth, we see Isaac is as well. His herds are growing, his livestock, and the surrounding nations who are not God followers, who do not worship the one true God, though they may have had a respect in some ways, they notice what's happening and they become jealous. And we see here that they start filling in the wells. They say, "We're having enough of this. You're not going to get water from our land." They're filling in those wells. And Titus, throw up that image. This is kind of where these paths are going. You'll see Gerar there in the middle, Beersheba, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and Rehoboth down there in the bottom. You see Jerusalem up there. It kind of gives you an idea of where all this is happening. Kind of a small area, but not too small either. So this is where these events are happening in Isaac's life. And as they are digging these wells, they're reminded that God is faithful because he gives them water. He causes the wells to produce water, and they get it, and he calls it Rehoboth, and that simply means room enough. Now, even though the other wells had resulted in quarreling, this one seems to be okay with King Abimelech and his people. Sometimes in this life, we're not going to get along with everybody. I think I was reminded of that this election season. I was reminded of it as a kid. We're reminded of it all of life. Not everyone is going to get along with you. Not everyone is going to get along with me. I remember in grade school, I was always a bigger kid, but that didn't mean you didn't get picked on because for whatever reason, it still happens. But there was this one kid I can remember, he just did not like me for whatever reason. And I still have never known why, but at some point, we must realize this is a fact of life. Relationships are a fact of life, and Isaac, we find here, is dealing with this relational conflict that many of us deal with on a day-to-day basis. But notice how he deals with it. Notice Isaac did not escalate the conflict. Notice that even though Abimelech admitted, you have more forces, you have more things than we do, meaning he could probably overtake Abimelech, Isaac chose the peaceful path. He chose to deal with the problem and not the people, right? Isaac chose to be action-oriented instead of reactionary-oriented. Isaac serves in how he dealt with these people as an example for us all. We can learn much from this man as he deals with conflict with others. Fourth, learning about redemption from Isaac. Look at verse 23. Verse 23, from there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzah his advisor, and Phicol the commander of his army, Isaac said to him, why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank, and in the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, we have found water. And he called it Shabah. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And I'll deal with that section there, those last two verses, in just a minute. We see, once again, Isaac responds much like his father did before him. And we have to remember, these events are happening over multiple years. This isn't just all happening one thing at a time. We're used to this instant gratification. We see life happening before us on social media and on the news and whatever, but these events are happening over long periods of time. Isaac is growing in his faithfulness and his commitment to God as well, just like we saw with Abraham. Abraham messed up a lot. But what did Abraham do that we see Isaac does? He realizes God is the one who has blessed him, and he builds an altar to worship the Lord. He also makes this pact with King Abimelech and the Philistines. And notice, I think it's ironic, they said, send them away, get out of here, we don't want you around here. well, they all of a sudden see that God is blessing Isaac, and they want a little piece of that as well, right? They want a little piece of what God is doing in Isaac's life, and so they make an oath. They have a meal together, which was customary at that time, and then they find water, and they go their separate ways. Now, verses 34 through 35, those last two seem to not fit with this particular chapter. And I think that's why we have to remember these events are not happening chronologically. I think Moses wanted to interject here what God had done in Isaac's life, because we're shifting even more so to Jacob and Esau. And we see Esau takes a wife who is clearly of a pagan land, who does not honor the faith of their forefathers. Esau has rejected the faith. Esau has rejected the God of Abraham and Isaac. We're beginning to see that God is going to fulfill His covenant promise through the life of Jacob. And it won't be easy. It's going to be a long road for Jacob as well, but we're getting ready to see it. So consider with me a few things just for a minute. Time and time again, as we see these passages, we get to see God's blessings in the life of His own. Now, did these people live perfect lives? Were they always sinless? No. We see they messed up quite often. They had ups and downs in their own life. But what do we make of all this? How do we apply this? How do we take it into tomorrow? And I believe the proper response to God's blessings is worship. We worship God. Now, not just on Sunday, but worship is a daily activity that we must do. Worship is a daily activity, and Titus is going to throw a few things up on the screen for us this week, or for today. It's for us to practice this week. How do we make this worship a priority in our lives? And I think it starts with beginning each day with prayer. We must commit our days to God. Say, God, whatever you bring into my life today, I'm ready, because I know you're going to use these things. We should be ready to give glory to God throughout our days. If God does something in your life that you get to witness, give Him the glory for it. Thank Him for it. Say, God, thank you for protecting me. Thank you for making me well if I'm sick. Thank you for whatever. Thank you for my family. Thank you for this house. Thank you for whatever it may be. But as you know, sometimes this process is not always good. Sometimes it can be trying. Sometimes it can be hard. And that's why we trust the sanctification process, because we know that Romans 8:28, that God is going to use whatever God brings into our lives to sanctify us, to make us more like Christ. And then end each day with prayer. Some simple steps, but I know cannot always be easy unless we write these things down for us to do in order to make sure worship and God has the right spot and right priority in our lives. So what do we make of the life of Isaac? He was a man who was filled with moments of renewal. He had moments of regrets. He had moments of relational challenges. But then we see a life that was filled with moments of redemption as well. These aren't new concepts. We saw many of these things with Abraham, but most of all, we see God is faithfully sovereign over it all. We can trust God to direct our lives. We can trust God to protect our lives. Hebrews 6:17-18 says, "So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of His purpose, He guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us." We can trust God with our lives, much like Isaac did. So that means we can give God all our fears. We can give God all our frustrations. We can give Him all our stresses, our tensions, those things that irk on us, our those feelings and emotions that we experience every day, we can give them all to God. And God will shower us with His goodness, just like He did with Isaac. You see, today, we can have peace knowing that God is with us and God will faithfully care for us. Let us pray. Father, thank you today that we have seen in the life of a mere man, Isaac, that you are a good God and you take care of your own. It does not mean we won't experience frustrations or trials or hardships. Many times, most of those of our own doing. But it does mean that you are constantly there. Your love does not end with your own. Your faithfulness does not end with your own. Your goodness does not end with your own. So I pray today, I pray this week, that we will trust you with every step we take. And in your name I pray. Amen.